I'm a patriot. That means justice for you should be just as important to me as justice for me. Because whatever America does to me and they're allowed to get away with it, they'll be coming for you. My name is Gregg Marcel Dixon. I am a teacher by profession. I'm a low country native here in South Carolina. My family's been in the low country of South Carolina, down in the coast in the southern part of the state, since at least the mid-1700s. And I'm currently running for Congress. I'm running to represent South Carolina District 6 in the U.S. House of Representatives. I've always had an interest in my family's genealogy, so I was fortunate. When I was born, all of my great-grandparents, except one, were alive. And I even had two great-grandparents who were alive. And my father was raised by his great-grandparents who were born in the 1890s. And one died in the late 1970s and one died in the early 1980s. They were born 1896, 1895, respectively. So I was born within reach of people who were literally the children of those who were enslaved, or they were raised by people who were enslaved because their parents died. And in the video I posted on Twitter, I talked about my great-grandmother, my dear Nana, Justine Washington Brown, who pretty much helped raise me along with my mother. She died at 101 when I was 31 years old. I knew she was raised by her grandparents, but I never thought much of it until one day I was looking through the census records and I found that her grandfather, who would be my great-grandfather, was born in Beaufort in 1838. And by all measures, he was definitely born enslaved because he's there on the Freedmen records, the Freedmen Bureau records. Same thing with my great-grandfather, who just turned 99 on Tuesday. He grew up surrounded by people who were formerly enslaved. He is still alive. So I literally Skyped him the other day. I spoke with a man who was surrounded by people who were formerly enslaved by the United States of America, and he is still very much alive and well. The Freedmen's Bureau was an agency of the government that was established to help provide for the needs of those who were formerly enslaved and their children. But the Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to help Black Americans gain equity in the labor force, home ownership, land ownership. It was supposed to make sure that we were repaired, that the country repaired the damage they did to us. That never happened. There's a push right now for Joe Biden. I'm going to be nice. I call him Slow Joe Crow Biden, but Joe Biden, there's a push for him to bring back the Freedmen's Bureau, which he can do via executive order. Now, Donald Trump was going to do a Department of African American Affairs. Not quite the Freedmen's Bureau, but it would have been in that same vein. Joe Biden said to Black Americans, y'all have always had my back, which is we're fools for doing that, and he would have ours. He can, with executive order, bring back the Freedmen's Bureau, and he has not done it. That bureau has an unfinished job of repairing the great inequities that we see here in America, where Black Americans have been in this country longer than nearly all other ethnic groups, and yet we're to the bottom in terms of land and wealth. And that's because the job of Reconstruction never finished. Donald Trump had plans where he was going to invest at least $500 billion into the Black American community. He was going to start a Department of African American Affairs to focus specifically on our needs. He was talking about the damage that illegal immigration causes to Black Americans. There was some good stuff in the plan, even though it was still woefully insufficient. It's more, way more than what we're getting now and what any other presidential candidate has offered. And as far as why Joe Crow Biden has yet to do anything similar, it's because he doesn't have to. Unfortunately, Black Americans, we are a captured electorate, and that is our fault. Reparations is about a debt that is due. It is not to fight against racism. It is not to punish white people. And it is not race-based. Reparations is lineage status-based. So pretty much anyone who is identifying as Black and they are a descendant of an American enslaved or a person who was emancipated by the U.S. government, a freedman, they qualify for reparations. So if you are a Black person and your parents arrived here from Jamaica in the 1970s and you have no lineage tracing back to American slavery, you don't get reparations. Being Black is not enough. If you are a white person and you've been identifying as white your entire life, but you may have an enslaved ancestors, because in the South, especially in states like South Carolina, a lot of white people do, you still do not qualify for reparations. It is for those who identify as Black, and they are a descendant of those who were enslaved and then later emancipated by the American government. It's very easy to do because most Black Americans know our lineage very well. My plan calls for recipients to get $2.8 million in cash bond, and instead of the government just giving them a check for $3 million, $50 million would be insane, they pay them interest yearly until the full amount is paid. So that way, you don't have super inflation that would definitely happen if you gave 50 million people almost $3 million all at once. It will be paid monthly per interest on the cash bond. But reparations ultimately is something that comes from the federal government. And why? Because the state level, I can't speak for California, but a lot of states simply don't have the tax revenue to pay what is owed. The federal government does. Studies have shown Black Americans actually save more, even though we have the lowest amount of wealth. Black Americans actually save more than any other ethnic group. When the stimulus checks were given out, by the way, $1,000, $1,200, that evaporates, especially for parents. But when the stimulus checks were given out, study after study showed that Black Americans started more businesses than any other group. Black Americans, we are the ethnic group that came out of slavery and built Black Wall Streets. We had no protection from the government. We were being denied our rights, and we was able to build Black Wall Street. So giving Black Americans reparation will bolster the economy. We're not immigrants. Every penny we get is going to go right back into this nation. Whereas a person from another nation, for example, sends at least 50 to 20% of their wealth overseas. It will go right back into the economy. It's a win-win for everyone.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give a shout out to Gregg, Marcel, Dixon. He is a South Carolina congressional candidate who, let me say this. We have to have a conversation about reparations. Let's just keep it real. We need to have a conversation. We cannot sweep that under the rug. We cannot ignore it. We cannot even walk away from it. It's time to have a conversation about reparations. And it's funny that Gregg, Marcel, Dixon talked about this because the more people try to ignore reparations, the more a lot of people are going to talk about reparations, whether you are supportive or not supportive of reparations. Now, he was saying that according to Fox News, and again, he's been interviewed with Fox News talking about, reparations and everything. And Gregg, Marcel, Dixon is calling for Congress, on President Biden to give qualifying Black Americans $2.8 million in reparations in lasting effect of slavery. Now, California has passed their version of reparations. And now, if it continues, a lot of other states individually will have try to pass their version of reparations. I think I saw a video the other day of a Tampa man, from Tampa, Florida. He's talking about reparations. So, and it's going viral now. You got states like, and again, here's the states you need to watch. Because I noticed that, I think when it comes to, if I'm not mistaken, okay, New York. Because I already know about California, already passed their version of reparations. You're talking about New York. You're talking about Florida. You're talking about Georgia. All these major states, y'all need to take a look at because it's going to be the key in 2024 elections. And all these candidates, will reparations be on the table? Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, we ain't want to talk about that because if it's going to affect reparations for Black Americans, then it's going to have to be effective for all Americans, that's not true. And see, after everything that happened before the Civil War, and how Black Americans been suffering at that time, that, I mean, you gave a lot of money, and I'm not going to be, it's going to be controversial, but you gave some of the money to some people that don't deserve it. I'm not going to say the names, but they have it. But left out, black Americans that built this country, that was been here since day one, before all the people from other countries come into this country. But yet you didn't want to do anything to them for them. It's sad. And I'm starting to see it now that, when you talk about, former President Donald Trump and what he did to black Americans, and this is according to Gregg, Marcel, Dixon, that he was going to give them, hundreds of millions of dollars to help create, things for black Americans and everything else. But let's be realistic. So let's talk about reparations, because they trying to not have this conversation. And the conversations already happened 3 years ago. When you on Clubhouse, they keep bringing up reparations, or Twitter Spaces, you want to bring up reparations. They keep talking about it. And I know political leaders, whether you're a congressman, a senator, and of course the president of the United States, everybody hears about reparations for black Americans, and people try to ignore it. And then you giving money to Ukraine, billions among billions of dollars to Ukraine, but you didn't give no money for black Americans for reparations. That doesn't make any sense. And we shouldn't, and this is just basically controversial, we shouldn't even give that money to Ukraine like that. But it shows you, ladies and gentlemen, that they don't want to do right for black Americans who was been here before everybody else. And right now, let's have this conversation. It's been time to have this conversation about reparations. And so, when is the time to have a conversation? When are you going to put reparations bill on the table? I'm talking about any presidential candidate. Now, I agree with Gregg, Marcel, Dixon on one thing. When Joe Biden was talking about that, yes, you got my back, I'm going to get yours. I'm going to make sure you get yours. But I haven't seen that yet. Now, they're going to say, well, we gave you the Juneteenth holiday or a Black American Music Month. That's not what black people wanted. Some of us don't. We want reparations for the descendants of American slavery, Adolf or freedmen. This is what we want, and we want to put that on the table. We've been talking about this for almost 5 or 6 years now, and political leaders or congressional leaders choose to ignore it. But you see what happened in California, and as they say, what happened in California happens in the nation. Look what happened in California. California passed their version of reparations. It's time now to to create this reparations bill. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, the HR 40, that basically this is the reparations bill, but most people who believes in reparations, like Dr. Sandy Darity, that's not the version they were looking. That's not the version they wanted. The HR 40. They need more than that. So let's just have this conversation. Let's do this. And why not now? We've been waiting for this reparation bill to be even involved. And the HR 40 was introduced, and as you can tell, they still refuse to put in Congress, of course, they put it on the floor. I think they passed HR 40, but then in the Senate, they kept quiet. They still haven't even put that on the Senate floor yet. But at the end of the day, I heard that some of the stuff on the HR 40 wasn't the one that we were looking for anyway. So again, let's have this conversation about reparations. Let's do it. Y'all let me know what you think about this in the comments, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Lions Den is out. Deuces.